This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Support for A Step Beyond the Fire podcast is due in part to the following sponsor.
Hey guys, this is Riley McKenzie with Quality Equipment and Parts. Ever have those days where you cannot burn because the risk is too high? Well, at Quality Equipment and Parts, we are a family-owned and operated forestry equipment dealership located in Lake City, Florida. As a forestry equipment dealer for the last 23 years, we specialize and provide multiple lines of dedicated forestry mulchers that can limit your risk during those times you cannot burn. Give me a call today at 386-754-6186. Again, that is 386-754-6186. Have a great day.
If you're a private landowner in the state of Florida and you're looking for help with your forest management needs, I encourage you to reach out to my good friend Scott Crosby, owner of Crosby Forestry and GIS Services, LLC. Check out his website at crosbyforestry.com. He's got 33 years of forestry experience, and he'll help you turn your land into forest and forest into cash with a stewardship ethic. Check him out today. Welcome back to another episode of A Step Beyond the Fire. I'm really excited to welcome Mr. David Hogrefe to the show today. David has been involved with the wildland fire community for the past 15 years in both the public and private sector. He's the current president and founder of the Sandpine Alliance, which is a company focused on providing prescribed fire, wildfire suppression, and land management services in Florida and around the U.S. He's also the founder of Sandpine Alliance International, which is a nonprofit focused on conservation and humanitarian work in East Africa. Welcome to the show, David. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Cully. I appreciate that.
So one of the things I wanted to get into, I've had a lot of time for reflection about some of the interesting stories and things that people have been up to over the last year or so doing this show. So out of all those amazing stories that I hear from folks, I like to begin conversations with us learning a little bit more about our guests and how they got to where they are today. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with us and how your interest in fire began?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Florida. I'm a native Floridian. Grew up in South Florida near the Everglades. And as a kid, I'd always see those columns coming up from the Everglades and the cane fields and wonder what it's like being under a fire like that. And just grew up with that interest. So by the time I graduated high school, I actually started applying with Florida Forest Service, looking around to see how I could get into a job like that. And eventually got a job with the Florida Park Service, which after a couple years with them, worked into being on one of their fire teams, the District 4 Viper team, and spent 6 years working with them, 10 years in fire in the Park Service, and built my career that way. And shortly we'll get into what I did after that. But that was my intro to fire and my training. Great time with the agencies, had a lot of fun, met a lot of people. And that got me in the direction that I'm now taking.
That's awesome. I had a chance early on in my career to work for the Florida Park Service, and I really have a lot of great things to say about them. A lot of hardworking people, a lot of really skilled people that work for that organization too. And I know a lot of really competent, a lot of great people that have done a lot in their careers have gotten their start, or either that or they stayed with the Park Service during their career. So it's always good to hear that. But that was a great experience at being on that traveling fire team too.
Absolutely.
You're a great example of a person who has made a true career in fire. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit more about the story of how Sandpine Alliance began?
Sure thing. Yeah, obviously, like we just discussed, I got my start in the Florida Park Service, 10 years with them, working with an agency. Sandpine actually came out of my first trip to Africa. So I'll sort of tie this in on how I got tied into over there. In 2013, I started looking into where some of the most remote off-the-grid places are on the planet. And I was doing my research, searching around, calling people, talking to different groups, and South Sudan kept coming up. And I was like, this might be the kind of place I want to go to. I've got it in my family's blood to be explorers, go around the world. And I was like, let's see who I can talk to over there. So I started reaching out to all the nonprofits and different groups that worked in that area, Eastern Africa. And it was pretty hard to get in. A lot of them were just no, wouldn't answer, wouldn't respond to you. But I got a hold of a couple of them, and they just said, hey, there's 3 significant problems over here that we're all trying to manage and stabilize. South Sudan's come out of a generational civil war, just won their independence in 2005. And their big issues are security. They're still dealing with that war and tribal fighting. Water, they get extreme amount of rains in their wet season because they're 3 degrees north of the equator, and then it dries up for the rest of the year. And then the third one, what tied me in, they said their third problem is fire. And when I heard that fire is an issue, I was like, hey, well, tell me more about fire first. I get the other 2. And they're like, well, the locals light everything on fire. There's no agencies. There's no management over fire here. It's how it's been thousands of years ago, still is today. They burn their fields. They burn to just clear the grass to get through. They burn to hunt. They burn ceremonially. And also, it being 3 degrees from the equator, their grass can grow 6 to 12 foot a year. So if you're trying to walk through this thick grass and brush, they'll burn it off just so they have access to areas that they wouldn't otherwise. So they're doing fuel management as well. And when they do that, you have nonprofit groups like engineers, doctors, soldiers, pilots, missionaries, all coming in, stabilize the region. And their supplies, their compounds are getting burned up. So I then threw out, hey, that's what I do for a living. I'm a certified prescribed burn box, RXB2. I work on a team, travels around and does this kind of stuff. I fight wildfires and do prescribed burn work. If I can, let's see how I can plug in. And so I gave the Park Service 6 months heads up and told them, hey, I'm going to Africa, one-way ticket, and I don't know when I'm coming back. And that worked into flying into South Sudan in 2015. There were some delays for a couple of years due to instability. But finally, I got over there in 15 and stayed with them an entire dry season. Just flew in there, tied in with these nonprofits, and sort of became a fire specialist for them. From there, then, when I was over there, the idea of Sandpine, where it starts getting to your question, after that season, and I'll tell you a lot more stories about that shortly, but after that season, I was like, how can I go back and still come and do this kind of work, still tie in with these nonprofits on a year or bi-yearly basis? And I knew I couldn't do it on a park ranger salary with what my plans were, so I started thinking outside the box, planning, reading. I'm an avid reader. I try to read about 100 books a year. So I started studying business management, how to open a business, how to tie fire into it, and started Sandpine Alliance as a for-profit corporation that I could run fire management, fire suppression, and prescribed burn work. And that would then allow me later to start Sandpine Alliance International, my nonprofit, which focuses on the work that we do in South Sudan and Eastern Africa.
So you have this great connection over in Africa, and you're able to use your business acumen and things that you've learned in your experiences with the Park Service to create this organization that can address some of these needs that these folks have in this area, which the main one of which is, of course, is fire. So you begin this project, and that's how Sandpine Alliance, that's why Sandpine Alliance was formed originally. Is that what happened?
Correct. Yeah. So out of the experience I had in Africa, getting to know the different nonprofits and the needs that were over there, that's why I formed my company then, so that I could actually fund. And most of the fundraising that I do as a business, I can actually deposit 40% of my nonprofit, so I guess supplemental income. And I started a company so that I could help fund my nonprofit along with anyone else who's donating to it to do the work over there in South Sudan.
So going into a little bit more about your work, so in this the third question I had for you here, diving into that nonprofit work. So you created Sandpine Alliance to sort of get this this great momentum going for your humanitarian work. So you created Sandpine Alliance International. That concept of the nonprofit work, it began for you as a desire to help people in that area.
Correct. Yeah, started Sandpine Alliance with the intent of starting Sandpine Alliance International as well. It took a couple years to get that up and going. Of course, any business when you start, it always has its hiccups at the beginning. So the first couple of years weren't the greatest as any business. But as you get it going, you're more successful, you get clients. I was then able to help fund and start up Sandpine Alliance International, which was then able to gather more support for the work we've been doing over in South Sudan.
So you've been able to combine two of the things that you really love in this life, which is really Africa and fire. So can you share with us about how fire is part of life for these folks in Africa that you're working with?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's some of the best stories I have over there. In the States, when we work on a fire, where you're working on a hand crew, an engine crew, heli-tac, all sorts of equipment is involved. Well, these people here live in wattle and daub huts. They still carry water in jugs on their heads. They start fire by hand and they cook with fire. No grid, none of that. When I first went there wasn't even really any cell anywhere. Now you'll find wattle and daub huts, but they'll have a cell phone. So that's changing the whole world in ways you wouldn't imagine. But they live like they did many thousand years ago still. And with that, fire is part of their lives. So to us, fire might be this unnatural, something that we're not used to, or we keep it in a box. Over there, they use fire to cook, to make their tools, to do their everyday life. So when they do a prescribed burn, which over there is kind of like, hey, the weather is good today, let's call our cousins and our uncle and the kids and bring them all out. And they all manage it. They're out there in their shorts and their flip-flops or barefoot. They have a machete, which they call a ponga over there. And maybe if they're well off, they'll have an equivalent of what we call a rogo, which is an adze head with a bamboo handle. And that's it. They'll hold a little goat trail and they'll start it either with a match or with a hand drill, friction fire, get the fire going, and then they'll carry it with grass torches that they make. It'd be like in Florida here, your andropogon, broom sedge.
Yeah.
Taking that, wrapping it real tight, take a vine and hold it together and making that a torch. Or another thing we do here in Florida is like our cabbage palm. They'll do the same thing. They got a couple palm trees. They'll use the branches from it and use that to carry the fire, drag it up their trail, start a backing fire around, their compound or around wherever the huts are, start backing it up the mountain or down the mountain, depending where they live. Or if they're out in the Nile, some of these guys will go out hunting and they'll hunt all the way out to the Nile, the Blue Nile particularly, or one of the tributaries, and they'll start back burning along the river. And they'll let that go for a while they're hunting, and it's just creeping around early season until they get a decent amount of black. And then as they finish their hunts and they go back to their villages, many times they'll either drop a little fire, sometimes a quarter mile, sometimes a half mile apart, or if they have matches, every quarter, half mile, they drop a match. And they keep walking and they drop a match. And it starts these point source ignition that just works its way into the black at the river and starts flanking and running through that veldt, which is what they call their brush. And sometimes you can get 1 million, 2 million acre fire over a couple weeks burning in the veldt, and it just continues and continues as it gets close to
1 million acres or two.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm pretty sure the Savory Institute, which we've done work with over there, they've said multiple times it's not uncommon for Africa to burn 1 billion acres a year, which is more than anything we see all over North and South America combined.
I can't even imagine that kind of acreage.
Yeah, it's a massive continent with a massive amount of fire. A lot of it's grass fire, but they do have brush and timber as well. it's the area I worked in Eastern Equatoria, South Sudan, was where we were based for my first trip. And there you have the low peat mountains, which are beautiful, 2,000 to 4,000 foot mountains. And they run out into a dry savanna and then the wet savanna out towards the Nile and its tributaries. And so you have a massive change of biodiversity, and some of it's spread out over, tens of miles. But beautiful area that I would work out of a backpack and hammock and travel around to some of the different villages or stay with an NGO. And if I'd see a column of fire, I would just go investigate it and find out what's up. Oh, they're burning over here, tie into them. And then if one of the NGO compounds nearby was threatened, I'd go work around that, either do a prescribed burn ahead of time or stay at the compound and do a burnout as the fire got closer to protect the resources of those NGOs.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how, what that looks like for you as an individual being out there. So you're just basically, you're out in the backcountry in these remote areas, and when you see a column of fire, you basically you go over there and you talk to the people that are burning and see how you can help. Is that kind of how it works?
Sort of. The biggest issue is there's about 60 dialects in South Sudan. English is listed as their official language because the U.S. government, the U.S. government helped set them up, but maybe 3 to 4% of the population actually speak English. The younger children starting to pick up more and more of it. Anywhere there is education, it's hard to get, but where there is, they start teaching them. But the older people and the adults don't really speak it. So I had to start picking up a little bit of Lapit, Latuka, and Arabic just to mix with some of these dialects. But there was not uncommon. We'd be on a fire. I'd be burning with 2 or 3 of the guys from a village I know that I can at least communicate decently. And then other people would join in that are speaking an entirely another language. So we think we have comm problems over here with our radios and fancy tech. Over there, there's several languages on a fire line. And you're like, who's he? Why is he lighting now? Don't know. He just joined in. He's related to one of these other guys. So you had to keep your head on a swivel. Definitely the 10s and 18s are broken all the time, but they're so comfortable with fire, they don't even think about it. Whereas us from a Western perspective are just blown away with how they just handle it. They're barefoot or in shorts. They got a machete and a branch. They'll use a green bough as a sweeper and the grass torch as a torch. And they'll burn more acreage than we do with just those primitive tools. But you have to keep your head on a swivel because it's a very different type of fire than we are. It's more like, Native American fire would have been in the plains, a couple hundred years ago.
That's incredible to hear that. So, boy, you talk about lookout situations. You probably get all kinds of them over there when they're in the middle of doing those types of burns, huh?
For sure. We'd be times I was out hiking with them out to the Nile and you're camping there and they're back burning. But then you'll look over to the left and a couple miles away, there's another camp and they've got their fire going. You're like, well, we got to leave now because wind's pushing our direction. So you'd get on out of there and just work into the black and then head on out. And they didn't seem fazed one bit about it. I'd be taking weather readings with a Kestrel I brought with me. And at one point in the bottom of the dry season over there, it was very southwest U.S. kind of weather. We got 30 to 40 mile an hour sustained winds coming down off the mountains. And then temperatures got up to 115 to 120 degrees with relative humidity in the single digits for 4 to 5 hours. So extreme fire weather. And yet they're out there burning, slamming their black, but you don't want to be in between 2 fires. So yep, definitely head on a swivel, but that's why I was there, was to make sure that no NGO compounds were in between those fires and try to, save as much as I could whenever I'm working in the area.
That's incredible. So obviously nobody's wearing any sort of protective gear. It sounds like they're just, they have such a thorough understanding of fire that it's not even something they even think about, huh?
It's a comfort to them. Yeah, they would love to have what we have. Like I went over there and I didn't wear all my packs and helmets because a lot of times we're in grassland, but I would wear full Nomex boots. I had leather gloves and then I had a Nomex balaclava and sunglasses. So I could be head to toe covered with protective gear. And with that, of course, they loved me being around because I could get closer to the fire than they could when it was real hot. We'd play games. They'd start a little grass fire and try to box me in, and I'd just jump through it. And I'm like, no more of that, guys. But they thought it was a game almost to be like, you're protected from this. You can do it. But to them, it's, just when it gets hot, you back off. If you can go in farther, hold your breath and beat it out for a little bit and then step back.
Do you gain respect from the folks that are out there the more time that you spend in those areas like that?
Oh, absolutely. When you first get there, they call Westerners like ourselves Kawajas. And so you're the outsider, the Kawaja. You don't know our area, you don't know our language. And you don't want to go in there acting like you're the fire professional and know all about this because, you're in new fuel types. I've worked in the Southwest, but never in Africa before this. And so you go in respecting them and learning. And the more you're around them, the more you learn they know what they're doing. Some of them may not, but there's many these are great fire practitioners with no education at all. But they've learned from the age of 4 or 5 being on the fire line with their dad, holding a branch, swatting a dry creek bed, holding the fire from backing it while he's burning it, and grew up doing it, that they became very proficient at it. It's pretty rare to see them lose their own huts unless it's actually a wildfire that they weren't ready for. When they're burning, they can usually hold them. Now, if their huts do go up, it's an entire grass roof. So wattle and daub construction, which is like weaved bamboo with mud. And then the roofs are these huge sheaves of the wild grasses. So, and it makes a good shingling, but if it catches, it's like a giant torch. So holding that for structure protection is extremely hard compared to a tin roof and brick.
Boy, that's incredible that they're able to do those things. And they don't have much water, or do they use tools to speak of, or not so much?
So the only tools I saw them using would be their ponga, which is their main tool, a sort of curved machete with sort of a beak curved towards the back. And they use that and they'll take the back end as a scratcher and the front end as a cutter. They'll cut the brush back along where they want to hold it. And then they'll take the back and they'll scratch the ground a little bit. Some of those branches that they cut then they use as like a broom, like a sweeper, kind of like we'd use an old pine bough for Florida. And they'll use that and just make a small, maybe 6 to 12 inch holding line. And that's the tools they're using to set their line. If they're maybe better off, they might have an adze head, which would be like a hoe. And they'll use that to beef up that. But otherwise, they try to use natural creek beds, trails that people walk on, maybe a cattle trail because they're big herdsmen. They'll have a lot of cows and goats. And they'll use trails that they take and they'll burn off of them. But they'll burn up and down a mountain and all the way out into the
That's unbelievable.
savannah.
Wow.
So it's almost like they've taken a class in fire, but never have. It's just they saw it done and their ancestors did it, and they've lived in these areas for hundreds of years. So some of them have probably burnt, every year or two different communities there and have been doing this for their entire lives. So they're very familiar with their units.
Have there been any good lessons learned being a part of this more of an ancestral approach to fire?
Oh, absolutely. The first thing I think I would learn is, again, that they know more than we think they do. You'll go over there and you're protecting the nonprofits, and they may not get why the nonprofits don't protect themselves. That was one of the first questions when I finally got invited to one of their councils. And the center of each of their village, I'll give you a little background of how it's built. They have a bunch of poles all lashed together. And the first time I saw it, it was like, hey, this is kind of the center of the village. What are those? And each of those poles represents a generation. So they have what's called the Monamiji, which is like their warrior age clash males. And every 18 to 22 years, they'll rotate a generation. And as the new males come up into sort of leading and being the protectors of the village, they put a new pole and they seal it with pitch and tar so it doesn't rot away or get eaten by termites. And in the center of many villages, it's not uncommon to see, 60 poles lashed together. And you realize that each of those is a generation that they've been there. And you're not invited into these areas right away, but after I'd been there a few months, they started like, hey, Dave, you're like one of our Monamiji. And I didn't have to go through ritual testing. They have like a lot of cultures. They have tests that they put their young men through, and it's impressive. But since I worked with them, they're like, you can come to the circle. You sit with your own age group. And as you sit around the circle, closer to the center are the elders, the oldest of the village, and they make a ton of life and death decisions. And then you'll have a younger generation of elders. Then you'll have sort of the Monamiji, the warrior class. And then you'll have the children and the women and everyone else. And they form these rings as they sit. And they would allow me to then, after a couple months, come and sit with my age group. And when you see that, you see them sort of passing down that knowledge. And it is unfortunate the war that happened over there took away a ton of their knowledge. I would have loved to seen them before that because they had even more at that time. But the war killed many of their elders, many of their teachers and leaders. And it's amazing how much they still have. But there was a huge loss from that. But still finding out how well they do on fires, I'm like, they kept that knowledge to the best they can. And many of the villages I was in had no written language. It was more of an audible. It was the same as in many cultures before, passed down by story and oral teachings. And until the West had come in, nothing had really been recorded in their language.
That's unbelievable to hear that. I'm excited about this. I want to go to Africa now.
There are some awesome places over there. The less technology you can find, the better it is. I feel the cell phone's kind of ruining things because it's getting everywhere. They have no vehicle, no power or anything, but they got a cell phone and they'll charge it off some local guy's Jeep or a little solar panel, and they can talk to somebody across the world, but they have no other tech. And it kind of ruins the culture, I feel, almost, because they're getting exposed to things that take them away from what they already have. And I think they have a lot more than we think they do. These people are happier than most of us ever would be. And wages over there are 50 cents to $2 a day. And many times that's paid in grain or something else. They may not even have currency. And their local currency constantly fluctuates. The South Sudanese pound is extremely unstable and loses value overnight. So they can't really have monetary wealth. They have more wealth in their land, their villages. They're self-sufficient. They grow their own grain. They raise their own cattle. They fish, hunt, farm. Pretty awesome. And many of them are very happy with that. But as they see more of what the West has, I feel it detracts from it and makes them more unhappy. It's that keeping up with the American Joneses kind of thing.
We definitely created a lot of great things, but some of the things that we've created for ourselves have been to our detriment. That's for sure.
Yeah. And with fire, our culture is scared of it. We had to have a whole program, Smokey the Bear, to try to, don't put the match on the ground, which now we know we've turned around and realized that prescribed fire is good. Wildfire is what we want to avoid. But to them, to say that fire is bad would be against their own culture. They would be like, it's required for us to live. It's traditional. We've used it for everything from hunting and cooking and building our tools and building our houses to being our heat to what we use for ceremonies. So to them, saying that fire is bad or putting it out would be anathema.
Yeah, very wise words there. Well, considering all this great humanitarian work that you've done and bridging these gaps, and learning more from in an ancestral sense about fire. I wanted to ask you, if let's say that you had the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes on all this, what would you say?
First, I'd tell them that no matter who you're talking to, they have something they can teach you, even if you didn't first assume it. And then I'm an avid reader, so I don't feel I have the words to say yet, but Henry David Thoreau had something that people have said, Dave, you've done all this stuff, you should write a book. And I don't feel I'm there yet, because he said, and I'll paraphrase it, this is sort of my version of it, don't sit down to write until you first stood up to live. And that going and doing all these things, yep, I'm working on that living part, but I haven't gotten to the point of writing yet, because there's still a lot to learn. Every time I go back over there, I learn that, hey, maybe things I told them last time, they had it right before I was messing with them. And so you're better off going and observing, especially if you're in a new place, and learning what the locals have to teach. And then eventually you might start picking up. And that's why we have 2 eyes and 1 mouth. Sometimes we say too much. And we should actually be listening and observing what's going on first. And then my other motto is do today what others won't, do tomorrow what others can't, which is the Smoke Jumpers Creed. I've loved that since I was a little kid. And if you're scared of going out and doing something like going to Africa, when I first went there, people said I'd never come back. I got a one-way ticket to a country that was just coming out of a third world civil war. And they're like, Dave, you're going to die. You're going to get bit by a mamba or a mamba. You're going to get malaria. You're going to get shot. And I'm like, I could die on US 19 tomorrow here in the States. But if you're going and doing these kind of things, this is where you'll make a difference and you'll see who you really are. And that's what I challenge people to do, is go out of their comfort zone and do things that they've dreamed about, or do things that they really want to do, but that they're scared to do. But don't jump into it and think they know it all. Definitely go over there and learn the first time. Spend months. I mean, I spent months with these people before they even respected me. And then every time I'd come back, I'd have people I didn't even know just saying, hey, and my nickname over there is DVD, because David, when they say it with their accent, sounds like DVD. So like, Mr. DVD. And when they call me like that, I'm like, I don't even know who this guy is, but he knows who I am. And you build that relationship anywhere you go, build that relationship. And that is more important in most cultures than anything we could ever imagine in the U.S.
Well, it sounds like you and Sandpine Alliance International have really bridged a lot of gaps there. And I'm curious, and if folks are interested in supporting you in the work that you're doing, where can they go to find out more information?
So I do have a website. I haven't updated in years, just simply because what I do for supporting myself over there, I'll usually have a bunch of people I already know who will help fund me, or I'll fund it, like I said, up to 40% from my own company. And fire isn't something that you advertise on the television or on a Facebook ad, like, hey, call me to burn your yard. It's something that is word of mouth. And the fire community is pretty small, so at least in Florida, I'm pretty decently known just from getting around. With the Park Service, do a lot with the Central Florida Prescribed Fire Council, Engine Academy, those kind of things, and just keep active in the community. But I do have a website, sandpinealliance.com, and I've used that, in the past to put things out there. And otherwise, if you're a friend with me on Facebook, that's usually where, if I'm going to put something out, I might say, hey, got a plan, reach out to me. Otherwise, I would say the best way, if you personally want to reach out to me, since I'm more of the non-social media most of the time, is just put my email out there, sandpinealliance@gmail.com. Reach out to me, feel like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this or help you out with it. And that's a great way. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm big enough to invite like large groups. Maybe someday. I have a ton of firefighters who'd love to go with me. But it's pretty hard to get visas in and out of there, and can be pretty expensive and complicated to get people in and out of there. So I haven't gotten to that stage yet, but I have taken my wife, worked in small groups, and just keep doing what we can, try to get there every couple of years at least. And the locals burn everything, even if I'm not there. So I found they don't really need our help. We're just there to support them or help the people that are working with them to support them.
Fantastic. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface on hearing this great story of the work that you've been able to do over there. And I'm sure that we'll hear more about this in the future. But thank you, David, for enlightening us with your humanitarian work and giving us a very unique perspective on how fire is such an important part of our lives and around the world. And we really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And as always, we appreciate you taking us in another step beyond the fire.
Thank you. And hopefully I'll catch you around a campfire and I can tell you a lot more of the stories, because those can go on for hours. But this is a good taste, and hopefully everyone enjoyed.